This happened years ago, probably around 1999 or so, when I was about 17. My parents' house has a front door with a living room immediately to the right, with a large window that looks right into the kitchen, straight ahead when you enter the front door. We used to leave the shutters open for that window, and you'd be able to see in or out. One night around 11:30 or so, I was in the fully lit kitchen with a towel wrapped around my head. Completely irrelevant, but for some reason I will never forget it, while drinking a juice box. I started wandering around aimlessly and entered the living room. I stood there for a bit, kind of staring into space, when I realised that there was a man standing on my front lawn looking back at me. I have no idea how long he was there for, but the first thing that entered my mind was, wow, this is embarrassing. I'm wearing a towel on my head and drinking a juice box. Generally, if you're in your home and a dude is staring at you on your lawn, you should be more concerned about other things, i.e. your safety. Anyway, I awkwardly walked back into the kitchen not knowing what to do when I heard the softest knocks at my front door. At that point I freak out and go into my parents' room to wake my dad up. I eventually got him up after hearing another set of soft quiet knocks, and while he was getting his bearings straight, I crept back into the living room and kneeled on the floor to peek out the window and see if the guy was still there. What I actually saw was him across the street getting tackled by a few cops, one of whom had a gun out. I don't know what the guy wanted other than A, a hiding place, or B, to do something horrible to me, but what weirded me out the most was that if he was seemingly being chased by cops, why was he just standing on the lawn staring at me instead of continuing to run? I honestly think that this guy had the intention of breaking into my house and doing something horrible to me, but thankfully the cops got there first. When my daughter was a baby, not quite a year old, I decided to take her to the local park in my town. I had fond memories of my own mother taking me to this park when I was a kid. I was so excited to take mine there on a nice summer morning. It was later on in the morning on a Sunday. The park was pretty empty in spite of the nice weather because everyone was in church except for us. The park in the middle of the town and my memories of it as a child made me think it was a safe place despite this park's wooded areas and close proximity to major interstates. I'm a pretty reserved person usually, so I was kinda glad the park wasn't crowded yet. I put my baby in a swing and started to push her. Then, off of one of the many walking trails that wind through the park, in and out of the surrounded wooded areas, this scraggly looking dude in his late 20s or early 30s comes strolling towards us. He had a normal appearance, seemed sober, and I didn't give him a second thought until he comes up to the swing set and stands nearby. He doesn't have a kid or a pet with him. He's just randomly standing a few feet away from us, looking creepy as hell. He said hello, and I acknowledged his greeting with a slight nod. He told me I had a pretty baby. I said thanks. He was itching a little closer towards us, and my instinct was to put myself between him and the swing. By this time, my heart was beating out of my chest, and I'm wondering what I should do, or if I could kill a man with my bare hands. I decided it was time to get the fuck out of there. I stopped the swing and took my daughter out of it. As I started to carry her away from this scary-ass guy, he stepped just a little closer and asked me, "Do you think she would let me hold her?" This man had a strange look on his face that I couldn't read, but didn't need to do that to know that something was super wrong. I stood up as tall as my 5'4" frame would allow, looked him dead in the eyes and said I wouldn't let him hold her and to go the fuck somewhere else before I called the cops. I held eye contact long enough for him to get nervous, which felt like forever but was probably a few seconds, and he backed down. It was like when two cats fight and the tougher cat stares the weaker one down until it gives up. I was legitimately worried that I might snap and attack him. Don't fuck with a helicopter mum. By this time, other families and people had begun to show up in the park, so I was feeling braver and braver. I decided it was time to go home and headed for the car. In hindsight, I probably should have reported him to the cops or something, but how can you report something because it felt weird? It was in the way his body language felt intrusively creepy, the weird question and the intent yet slightly off in his eyes. It was only a few days later when I saw on the news that a baby was snatched from that same park where I was with my kid that day. I am 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that leads into my apartment automatically locks itself when it's closed. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get the mail while I was talking on the phone to my boyfriend. I returned to the apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail. While using the phone, I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face and he couldn't see me. Trying to be rational, while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just going to take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window, my apartment is on the first floor, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to my apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my key and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin, tired looking man. The police stood beside me and comforted me while the other police searched through my house. I was a mess, shivering and crying. They told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail and then hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. I am a female and I live with my parents and little sister in an area full of big single family detached homes, all built between 1920s and 1950. The yards are big and fenced, and our house is not the first house on our road, meaning that you have to walk up the road 5 minutes and pass like 10 other houses just to reach our house. This happened between the winter, and during our winter there's a lot of snow. My father always shovels a pathway from our gateway to the shed in the backyard that leaves other places untouched. During the winter, the sky goes really dark, early at like 4 PM or so, and by dark I mean pitch black. One morning, my father woke me up by coming to my room and asking if I had borrowed his shoes last evening for something. This was a very weird question, and of course I said no. My father told me that after he had finished shoveling the snow last evening, it had just turned dark. It had just freshly snowed, and the snow was pretty untouched everywhere. And he remembered admiring it in the light of his flashlight headband he uses when he goes outside, since our backyard doesn't have any lights and is all black without it. But this morning, there were footprints in the fresh snow. Big footprints that only could be made by a man. And since he lived with 3 women, he knew that instant that it had not been any of us. Of course, he had to make sure though. The footprints walked away from the path he had made into the fresh snow, and then it looked like the person had stood there for a while, then turned back to the path and left. Sure, some stranger's footprints in your backyard are creepy enough, but after I gave it some thought, it turned even more creepier. I mentioned that our backyard doesn't have any lights, and because of that it's pitch black. Well, since my dad left the backyard when it was already dark, and noticed the prints in the snow when the sun started to rise again, the person who left the prints had to stand there in the middle of the fresh fallen snow, staring into nothingness in the darkness. Someone walked 5 minutes to reach our house, walked all the way into our backyard and stood for a while in pure darkness in the middle of fresh snow and then left. Weird person who stood in our dark backyard. Please, let's never meet.